If you've spent any time looking into attachment theory, you've probably wondered, is this actually something that happens to you based on how you were parented? Or is it just personality, something you were born with that would have shown up no matter who raised you? It's a generally good question, and it turns out behavioral geneticists have actually tested it directly using twin studies. The answer isn't a clean split down the middle, and it's not what most people expect. So let's go through what the research actually found. Hello and welcome to Attachment Maps. My name is Carl, and I'm here to tell you things no one else is talking about. So, to figure out whether something is genetic, researchers use a method that relies on a simple fact about twins. Identical twins share basically 100% of their genes. Fraternal twins, like siblings, share on average 50%. Both types are twins. When raised together, share the same household, the same parents, the same general environment. So if you measure something in a large group of twins and identical twins are noticeably more similar to each other than fraternal twins are, that's evidence the trait has a genetic component. If identical and fraternal twins are about equally similar, that points toward environment, specifically the shared environment of growing up in the same home being the biggest factor. Researchers have applied exactly this logic to infant attachment using Ainsworth's strain situation procedure as the measurement tool. One of the most well-known studies, run by Bokhorst and colleagues in the Netherlands, looked at 157 pairs of twins, both identical and fraternal, and measured each child's attachment classification with their mother at 12 months old. Here's the finding, and it surprises a lot of people. The heritability of attachment security in infancy came out at essentially zero. To put that in concrete terms, in the Bokhorst study, about 52% of the variation in whether a child was securely or insecurely attached was explained by shared environment, meaning factors common to the household, like the general quality of parenting both twins received. The remaining 48% was explained by what's called non-shared environment, which includes things like measurement variability and the unique individual interactions each twin had with the caregiver, even within the same family. Genetics, statistically, explained almost none of it. That's a striking result because most psychological traits show at least moderate heritability. Personality traits like extroversion or neuroticism typically come in somewhere around 40 to 50% heritable. Attachment security in infancy did not follow that pattern at all. The researchers found something very close to what Bowlby's original theory would actually predict, that attachment security is primarily a product of the relationship between the specific child and the specific caregiver, not a trait the child carries into the relationship from genetics alone. This makes a certain amount of sense if you think about what attachment security actually is. It's not really a personality trait that lives inside the child. It's a description of a relationship, specifically whether a caregiver has been consistently responsive and sensitive to that particular child. Two genetically identical twins could, in principle, have meaningfully different relationships with the same parent, depending on subtle differences in temperament, birth order effects, or how the parent happens to relate to each child individually. And that's actually consistent with what the data showed. Most of the unexplained variance was non-shared, which fits with attachment being built relationship by relationship rather than being a fixed trait you arrive with. So, is the story just attachment is 100% environmental? End of discussion? Not quite. A few things complicate that picture. First, temperament. A child's temperament, how reactive they are, how easily soothed, how intense their emotional responses are, does have a real genetic component, and temperament can make caregiving harder or easier. A child with a more difficult or intense temperament may be tougher for a given parent to read and respond to consistently, which could indirectly affect attachment security, even though attachment itself isn't directly inherited. The Bokhorst study actually tested this too and found that differences in temperamental reactivity were not directly associated with the twins' attachment differences. So even this indirect pathway didn't show up clearly in the infant data. But it remains a reasonable hypothesis that's been explored further in later research. Second, the picture changes as people get older. While twin studies in infancy show this near zero heritability, a separate body of research looking at attachment in adolescence and adulthood finds something different: meaningfully higher genetic influence on attachment security later in development. One interpretation here is that as children grow, their own heritable traits play a bigger role in shaping how they interpret and respond to relationships, on top of whatever caregiving environment they had early on. It's not that genetics suddenly switches on. It's more that, over time, the individual's own characteristics increasingly shape how they engage with the relationships around them, which is a different question than how that initial bond was formed in infancy. Third, there's some emerging molecular genetics work looking at specific genes, including variations in the oxytocin receptor gene, which is involved in social bonding more broadly. Some longitudinal research has found that certain genetic variants appear to moderate how stable a person's attachment patterns remain from infancy into adulthood. This doesn't mean a specific gene determines your attachment pattern. It means some people may be more or less biologically sensitive to the relational experiences they have, which can affect how much early attachment patterns persist or shift over time. Now, there's one more wrinkle here, and it's worth flagging because it explains why you might see wildly different heritability numbers depending on what article you're reading. So far, everything I've described comes from the developmental tradition, the Bowlby and Ainsworth lineage, which measures attachment through direct observation. The strange situation in infancy, the adult attachment interview later in life, where a researcher analyzes how someone narrates their early relationships, not just what they say their style is. But there's a second separate research tradition coming out of social psychology that studies adult attachment very differently. This tradition started with Hazan and Shaver in the late 80s, and it measures attachment through self-report questionnaires. You read a set of statements about how you feel in close relationships and rate how much each one describes you. This is where most of the popular "What's Your Attachment Style" quizzes online actually come from. And when behavioral geneticists run twin studies using these self-report measures instead of the observational ones, they get noticeably higher heritability estimates. A 2024 study using the Minnesota Twin Registry looked at self-reported attachment style in older adults, found heritability around 36%, with the remaining variance explained by environmental factors not shared between twins. Other twin studies using self-report measures of adult attachment style have landed in a similar range. So you end up with what looks like a contradiction. Observational measures of attachment in childhood show almost no heritability, while self-report measures of attachment style in adulthood show a meaningful genetic component. So this isn't really about a contradiction about attachment itself. It's a sign that these two traditions are measuring somewhat different things. The observational approach is trying to capture the actual quality of a specific relationship. The self-report approach is closer to measuring a general personality disposition, how someone tends to describe and experience closeness across relationships in general. And general personality dispositions are exactly the kind of trait that tends to show moderate heritability. That distinction matters if you've ever taken one of those online attachment style quizzes and wondered how it relates to the parent-child attachment research you've read about elsewhere. They're related, but they're not measuring the exact same construct, and that's a big part of why the genetic findings look so different, depending on which body of research you're looking at. So where does that leave the nature versus nurture question? It depends partially on which question you're actually asking. For early childhood attachment, measured the way Bowlby and Ainsworth measured it, the evidence points strongly towards nurture. toward the actual quality and consistency of the caregiving relationship. For adult attachment styles, measured the way social psychology typically measures it, there's a real and replicated genetic component alongside a larger share of unshared environmental influence. Both things can be true at once. Early attachment is built primarily through relationship. But by the time you're an adult filling out a questionnaire about how you feel in relationships generally, you're also capturing something closer to a stable personality trait. And traits like that are rarely 100% environmental for anyone. Thanks for watching. Please hit that subscribe and like button, and I'll see you next time.